So, welcome everyone today to our event, Understanding Social Value and the Role of Apprenticeships. As mentioned, we've got a very full event, which will end at 12:15. But before that, I'm going to run through some housekeeping and then we'll just get on with it. So housekeeping, all our attendees, welcome, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Your camera will be off and your mics are muted. But we love to have your questions and comments in chat. And we want a lot of questions. And we're really keen that we hear from you. So if you could post in chat, and what would be really great if you could say which company you're from as well, because we just see a name and we don't know who you are. And it's always good to see who the companies are. A big thank you to all our speakers, a huge thank you to them. The format will be they will present and we will do Q&A at the end. So you won't have a chance at the end of each presentation, but you will. Please save those questions up or post them and I'll monitor chat as we go through. All our speakers' biographies, I've just posted in chat a link to it on our website because I'm not going to waste everyone's time by endlessly talking about them. They don't want me to, but please do read their biographies on our website. I think if I do say so myself, we've got an exceptionally impressive lineup of speakers. And again, thank you to them. The event is being recorded and will be available on our website. So if a colleague hasn't joined yet, or you know of people who are missing it or have to leave early, don't worry, the recording will be there. We've got nearly 90 people registered to attend. So welcome and thank you for supporting us. If you haven't yet joined our movement, please do. We've got lots of things happening, which I'll mention briefly at the end, but we've got a fantastic new new member initiative called the Employer Audit being launched very soon, which I will tell everyone about, but also we'll be in contact with you about it. So let's get on with what we're here to do. As I say, what social value, huge issue and a complex one, but I'm delighted to say that Sam Healy, who will be known to many people who've been part of our movement for quite some time, said to me, look, let's do something around social value and apprenticeships because it's such an important area. And of course, regulations have changed. So Sam's going to kick off for us on what is social value and the new requirements. And I would just say, before I move on to Sam, and I'll embarrass her hugely, Sam is really responsible as to why the club is in existence today. Alongside Leo Quinn, who formed us in 2013, Sam was the back office person, as I always reference her kitchen table, really running the club and getting it off the ground for the first 3 to 4 years of its existence. So thank you, Sam, for that. And over to you for your session.
Well, it's great to be back and to recognise so many names on the list of attendees. So lovely to be here today. And yes, this is a really important topic. So I'm keen to be able to share with you, I think, a bit of background around social value and then hand over to the other speakers for a bit more detail. So if I could have my first slide, please, that'd be great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the context of social value, some of the mechanism of how it works and some of the things that we need to be thinking about as a community. So the starting point really is that when organisations think about their sustainability agenda, a key aspect of that is using their purchasing power. So how they buy, what they buy is a critical part of how they can be a force for good through sustainability. And social value is just really a key aspect of how that works. Essentially, it started with local government using the Social Value Act. And, the driver there was for local government to use its buying power to deliver value to society across a number of themes. So it was around skills, employment and environment and so on. In 2019, there was a consultation. So to look at how this could be expanded and rolled out from local government to central government. And after quite a lot of consultation, engagement with organisations and with trade bodies, of course, during that period, there was also COVID and Brexit. So there was a lot for government to think about. So the final guidance came out just at the back end of 2020. And essentially, the way that this is going to work is social value will be embedded in public contracting regulations that started from January of this year. For those who are subject to the defence and security regulations, it actually kicks in from next month, from June. So how does it work? So essentially, social value is going to be used as part of the criteria in bids for government procurement. And it will be 10% or more of the marking score. So it's not 10% of the value, it's 10% of that marking score. And it's also really key here that the way that an organisation will be judged on its social value is very much based on the specifics of the contract. So it's not related to your corporate credentials. And many of us will be familiar when we are applying or responding to bids, is that you'll be asked all sorts of credentials about your organisation. But this is different. And this is why this is such a profound shift in the way that governments are going to be buying, is that it will actually be very much linked to how you deliver the contract and what you deliver. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And essentially, it's going to align across 5 core themes. And you'll see, obviously, with the first theme, how much this is front and centre of our thinking in the UK is, the impact, the profound impact that COVID has had on business and on skills and on young people particularly. So one of these 5 themes that governments will be looking at will be around COVID recovery. The second one is around economic inequality, and so that's creating jobs and skills and looking at supply chain specifically and resilience and capacity. There's a theme around climate change, so really, really key to a number of government departments and to the UK specifically, with us hosting COP26 later this year. Equal opportunity, so really strong focus on inequality in the workforce and making sure there's equal opportunity, equality, inclusion for all. And then finally, well-being. So a real diverse set of themes here. And what's likely to happen is that each government department, as they procure using this 5 themes, will start to tune and use themes that really align with their own purpose and mission as a government department. So although all 5 themes are available to all government departments, it's likely that you'll start to see them perhaps focusing and prioritising. Now, for the information behind these 5 themes, the questions against them have already been published. So that's available, and we'll send links later in the session. But I think this is something that's really clear here for us as suppliers, is that the questions that are likely to be asked in the bids are already published, and we can spend the time starting to look at them and think through of how we can start to respond. And I think one of the critical areas, I think, for us as a community is recognising how strongly linked these themes are to skills and specifically to early careers and apprenticeships. And I think that's why we wanted to flag with this community today, is that connection. So recognising that parts of your business will be looking at sort of winning bids from government departments or through primes, will be starting to look at how that then links to your strategy of apprenticeships and so on. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to Kate next, but hopefully that sets the scene then of, this is a really quite significant shift in how central governments are going to be buying. It's across a number of themes, but there's a very strong element here around skills, around apprenticeships. So thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Just unmuting myself and putting my camera back on. We've already had a question in, which I'll save to the end. Thank you very much, Andy. We'll put that to the panel at our Q&A session. As Sam's referenced, we now want to move on to Kate Myers, Head of Skills, Employment and Education at HS2, who's going to outline the social value and skills from that sort of client perspective. And so, Kate, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jill. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Myers, and as I've been introduced, I'm the Head of Skills, Employment and Education here at HS2. Before I talk in a little bit more detail about social value and skills from the client perspective and what these new regulations mean or don't mean for us at HS2, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of where we are with the project at the moment, if that's okay. So next slide, please, Brian. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what HS2 is. When we do our insight, we find that lots of people still don't. But so HS2 will be the new high-speed backbone of our rail network, connecting the city centres of Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds and London. And once it's fully complete, we will have built 345 miles of new high-speed track. So that's essentially, as the crow flies, half the length from Land's End to John O'Groats. When we're fully operational, up to 48 HS2 trains with 1,100 seats on each will be running every hour on the UK network. So this really is an absolutely massive undertaking. It's the first new intercity railway north of London in 100 years, and it is Europe's largest infrastructure project. Next slide, please. When we are delivering sessions in schools or virtually, as we've been doing, we often get asked by students, when's HS2 going to start? And the answer is it already has. Phase 1 of the route between Birmingham and London, we've completed the enabling works. So that's things like the ecological surveys and the archaeology and the utilities and road diversions and the groundworks and lots of site clearance. And main works, civils, is now well underway, most recently with the launch of the first tunnel boring machine, Florence, earlier on this month. So that's just to kind of set the scene about the size and scale of the project. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. But HS2 is obviously about a lot more than just building the railway itself. As you can see on the screen there, we've got 7 strategic goals, and a number of those are linked into social value and how we've been capturing some of the elements of social value to date through our benefits realisation programme. So at the moment, HS2 is not actually covered by the new requirements because we are part of the utilities as opposed to separately. But a lot of the measures we've already been doing, I think, really speak to social value, and we're kind of viewing social value as the wrapper around a lot of the work that we've already been doing, and it picks up on the majority of the themes that Sam mentioned earlier. I'm not going to be speaking at all about the kind of environmental elements, but stuff around COVID recovery, the more representative workforce, those kinds of things I will be covering. So the important piece for me is around social value and skills and employment, and that is really about ensuring that HS2 will create sustainable opportunities for young people, local people, and those from diverse backgrounds. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. This is just a kind of a bit about the scale of the project in terms of jobs and skills. So at peak construction, we will be employing 30,000. That doesn't mean that only 30,000 people will work on the project. That's just at any one time. That is the highest amount of people that we will be employing or will be working on the project. And the vast majority of those are through our supply chain. 70% of jobs will be created outside London, which again is speaking to some of the government agenda around levelling up and building it back better. And we have a target of 2,000 apprentices over the lifetime of the project. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. This is a little bit more about how we've actually embedded requirements around skills and employment. So what you can see on the screen is the range of skills, employment and education outputs, as we call them, that we require our contractors to provide us with. Note it is a requirement. So we have embedded requirements around skills, employment and education in all our major tier 1 contracts, and that starts at PQQ for most of those contracts right through to contract closed out, and we kind of view it as there is some very much some carrot there and there is some stick as well. So before contracts are awarded, we have the works information which outlines this menu of different outputs. We push that through hot starts. There's an IT question through the evaluation and moderation before those contracts start. And then after contract award, we have the contract mobilisation, where we have a named contact within our tier 1 contractors who are required to provide us with skills, employment and education implementation plans with annual targets. There's quarterly reporting, and we're looking for the variance against those targets. And we also have 6 monthly reviews. And those requirements are flowed down from the tier 1s to the rest of their supply chain. We don't tell the tier ones how they do it, we just require that they consider how they flow those down. But a key part of what we're doing is we're really using the convening power of HS2 to bring together those contractors, the tier ones and tier twos, etc., together with local and national stakeholders to achieve those goals. So that could be getting them together with local FE colleges, it could be getting them together with, for example, in Birmingham with West Midlands Combined Authority, etc. So that's very much how we see our role as a client, bringing people together. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the aspirations around the numbers. Just wanted to kind of talk briefly about where we are at the moment. So currently over 16,000 people are working on HS2, and we've had over 500 apprenticeship starts against that target of 2,000. We've also had over 800 workless job starts, and by workless job starts that means that somebody has to go into sustainable employment for at least 26 weeks. More than 2,000 businesses have already delivered work on HS2, and 70% of those are SMEs. So it is a great start, but there's still a lot more to do. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So as the stats says there, almost a quarter of today's workforce is due to require by 2028. So we do need to attract and retain more people into the business, but we are very keen that we expand and upskill the talent pool in construction and engineering. We know we've got skills mismatches. I've just been undertaking some work to look at that. But what we want to do, because of the scale of those skills mismatches, it's really important that if we just continue to try and appeal to the people we've always appealed to, we're not going to have the workforce that we need. So we really need to have a workforce that better reflects the communities that we serve. We really need to attract and retain diverse and previously underrepresented people, including more young people, women, and those from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. This really is a once in a generation programme, and we have an unprecedented opportunity to shape the workforce of tomorrow for generations to come. And I see C and social value as the kind of key driver for doing that. And that's it from me. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I haven't got my apologies. I didn't have my camera back on. I clicked it twice. That was great, Kate. Thank you very, very much. And I think it's really interesting to hear about a major client as a convening power, and it's a great lens to look at that through. A couple of things struck me from that. You referenced about the aging population and how there is obviously the skills gaps in the industry, and I've just I'll post it in chat when Susan starts to speak. There's an article in Construction News outlining from our founder Leo Quinn, talking about just this very thing, and the club and its members investing in earn and learn and investing in emerging talents, as I say, linked to our manifesto. So I'll post that in chat. And you also referenced about diversifying where you recruit from, and we had a great event last year which Mark Lomas from HS2 spoke, and that's available on our website, so I'll also post that in chat as well when we go on to our next speaker, who is Susan Rael, who's technical director at Skanska. And Susan's going to outline the importance of apprenticeships as part of social value and aligning both. So over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Jill. I'm going to be talking specifically about civil engineering apprentices and about my lived experience with apprentices and where they fit in and what we can do better and improve on. If I could get the next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, that's not the one I was expecting, which is fine. So I think just to start off with, I think this is such a good time to be talking about apprenticeships, because over the last year as an industry, we've been so stable and performed so well. I think we've got a great chance and quite a short window to attract some really different people into our industry. But we've got a great responsibility there as well, because they're not necessarily the kind of people who would naturally look at construction and think, yay, that's for me. But if we can attract them in, the diversity that they would bring to us would make a big difference to us. So I just wanted to do a bit of a refresher on the levels of apprenticeships, because that has changed, quite significantly over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So, you can start with the level 3, which is, the apprentices that are going to do a couple of years, and that's going to take them through their qualification with their day release. And that's a much less daunting start for people, because if you're talking about sort of 16 to 18-year-olds, I know at 16, I wasn't in a position to make those decisions, apart from the fact that I had a mother who knew exactly what my decisions were going to be and helped me along with my brother. But not everyone has that. And certainly the careers advice, which I would have thought in the 30 years since I made this decision would have moved on from our apprentices, we understand it hasn't moved as much as we would like to think it has. So industry needs to get involved in that conversation with kids to articulate and show off and say, it's like this. It's not all about mud and wearing orange jackets. For me, that's actually quite the fun bit, but not for everyone probably. But apprentices, they can start with that sort of smaller 1 to 2 years. Then they can move. They could decide then they want to move on to be a trainee and do an HND, or they could decide, actually, I'm happy with my level 3 qualification. But if they do take the next step, then once they're there, maybe they're going to look and say, do you know what? I never really thought I could, but I can be a graduate. I can do that. And that opportunity is there. And they're not signing their life away to, I've committed to this career, it's going to look like this, and it's decided for the next 30 years. It's so much more flexible now to move, between roles, and to have different career pathways to give us as an industry the broad range of skills which we need. Because I do feel strongly, I was very lucky. I had a very clear steer from my mum, who probably still at the age of 94, I'm fairly scared of, which is great. But not everybody has that. The careers advice I got at school was woeful. I was, after expressing an interest in engineering, I was kindly given the perspective for a secretarial course at Inverness College, so that was very helpful. But it hasn't, for the feedback we're getting is it's not that much further forward. So industry has got to get involved and show people what is out there. One of my team has a really good way of incentivizing people to join our industry. So when he goes to STEM events at his local school, which he does regularly, he's very passionate about his subject, which is engineering surveying. He gets his car cleaned and takes his nice, shiny, clean car. And when kids are bored and looking out the window, he said, well, I drive that car. And suddenly these kids are like, oh, I'd like to drive that car. And now they're listening to what he's got to tell them. So more than one way to get people interested. And I think perhaps what I didn't appreciate until I took this role is the apprenticeships that are available to upskill people who are quite far through their career. So we are running digital apprenticeships. So we're upskilling our environmental managers and various other people to give us those digital skills in all areas of our business, because that's what we need. And when they qualified 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't a thing, that wasn't a requirement. Next slide, please. I think the other thing to note, now that you can do a degree apprenticeships, is just what a difference that can make to a young person to follow that route rather than a graduate program. I can't honestly say, would I have chosen 30 years ago to incur that much debt? Very much doubt it. I think that would have put me off. But having an alternative and following a degree route with all the benefit that gives an organisation, because you've got somebody who's earning and learning at the same time. So when they get to the stage that they would be getting chucked out of university, they're of so much more use to a project. They've got so much more experience. So that balance is shifting. We need to be more welcoming to apprentices and more mindful of how we, where their standing fits in a company, which I'll talk a little bit more in the next couple of slides, but it's not as simple as just taking on apprentices. It is also about how we encourage them and keep them and retain them and develop them and make them a fabulous and pivotal part of our business. So if we could look at the next slide, please. The next slide. There. So why should you care about them? Well, apart from the 10% weighting on your tender, which means they're pivotal to winning work, and apart from the benefit to society, if you don't care about apprentices, you may effectively do what this little girl is doing. You may just as well just keep chucking money out of the window. I think initially when the apprenticeship levy was brought in, it was quite rigid in terms of what you could use it for. It's a bit more flexible. So apart from the apprenticeships that we've looked at on the first slide, there are other, levy funded MBAs, for example. So we've got a lady who's going through Cranfield doing an MBA, and that has changed the cost to Skanska from £30,000 to £10,000. Now, for a big organisation, that's a chunk of money. But if you've got, an SME who've got a high potential person and they're thinking, do you know what? We'd like to develop them. We'd like them to help us manage our business better. £10,000 becomes a much more achievable solution, and it's, available to everyone. And I think the other thing I think is really important to note about apprenticeships is it's that broad range of people and aspirations and where they want to fit in their career. I do recall going to a graduate day about 10, 12 years ago, and somebody asked our graduates if they wanted to be a CEO, and 75% of them put their hands up. Well, we haven't got space for 75% of our graduates to be our CEO. So that's not sustainable for us as a business. And we have had the opportunity to get involved with some of the Trailblazer programs where industry has an opportunity to influence what the apprentices learn. So we're not reliant or expecting academia to guess what we need. We're actually saying, this is what we need. These are the skills we need. These are our gaps. These are where we see the focus being in the future. So it's absolutely within our gift. If you look at the next slide, please. So things to consider with apprenticeships. We had a situation on one of our major schemes about 2 or 3 years ago where our apprentices came to us and said, please can you take the title apprentice out of our title, because we are being treated as second-class citizens. We are being put to the bottom of the pile. We are not being treated with a great deal of respect, which was an awful, awful feeling when they came and spoke to us about that. So we worked with them because we really didn't want to take that name out of their title, because we think it's a good thing, it's a positive thing, not the experience they were living. And we formalised an apprentice network. We made sure everybody had a development plan. We allocated new mentors to them. Traditionally, it had been typically the HR person had been the mentor for all the apprentices. But for graduates, they got their own mentor within the delivery team generally. So we changed that. That's made a big difference, and they now are getting much more respect. I still don't think they're where they should be within Skanska as a criticism of ourselves. I still think we favour the graduate cohorts, and that's wrong. That doesn't work. Challenges we've had with apprenticeships have been around, typically around location and sometimes subject. So for example, we've got a current challenge on HS2 with our recruitment of tunnelling apprentices, because the tunnelling programme goes, tunnel for 6 months, break for 4, tunnel for 8, as a rough example. So what do you do with tunnelling apprentices for the 4 months when there is no tunnelling? So alongside their tunnelling apprenticeship, we're also looking at the transferable skills they're developing, which allows us to give them a role and a fulfilling and valuable role to us for the 4 months, and then back into that full-on tunnelling. On a slightly different topic, then there's location. Apprentices are at the bottom end of the pay scale because of where they are in their career, and that means they're not always able to pick up sticks and go and get digs in another area if they're working away from home. And we do need to consider that. So highways project can be a bit more flexible for them, because there can typically be a caravan site or somewhere to get reasonably good quality digs for a cost that will work for them. Moving someone to the centre of London, that's a different kettle of fish, and it is something that we do need to consider with them. And then just to go to the next slide and talk about some of my people. So the little chap smiling at the camera there is Connor. Connor joined us as a 16-year-old. He doesn't look a great deal older now, and I think we're about 12, 14 years further on, but anyway. Connor actually had to leave Skanska to complete his degree. So he didn't join as an apprentice with the plan of doing a degree, but as he developed in confidence and experience and enjoyed being part of our wonderful industry, he said, actually, I do want to do a degree. At that stage in his career, there was no option to do a degree apprenticeship, so he had to leave. He did leave and he did come back. And I think that's the other key point to note with apprenticeships, because yes, they'll count towards our social value. However, when we look at our statistics, our retention of apprentices is much, much higher than it is of graduates. So the lady that I was speaking to about her graduate programme, who's the lady doing the MBA, said that of her 2010 intake of 10 graduates, she's the only one left in Skanska. But Connor has been with us for 14 years. If we could go on to the next slide, which is a little mugshot lineup. I promise I wasn't lining them up to shoot them. They were posing for the camera. 2 of the gents there are apprentices at that time, which is 10 years ago, and 2 are graduates. One of the graduates has left civil engineering and gone to our building division. The other one left the company not long after that photograph was taken. Both apprentices are still with us. So Matt is an agent on HS2. And Connor is now a senior design engineer with Skanska Tech. We get a much better return on our investment with our apprentices than when we do with our graduates. And also, our apprentices, we are now finding, are the people that are teaching our graduates when they join as site engineers, because they're working along apprentices who've been there for 3 or 4 years. You know, there is no downside to having these people in our team. You know, they're just amazing. And then finally, the last slide is just how hard can it be to attract people to our industry? Because look at some of the cool things we get to do. But I think we do need to get much better at articulating to people the cool things we get to do and how interesting and diverse our industry is. And if we can attract these people and they come, they will change how we think and we deliver, and we will have an industry fit for the future. So now I'm going to hand over to Daniel from the Federation of Small Businesses.
That was great. Thank you so much, Susan. Some really interesting things raised here, and many interesting things, and the things that sort of just struck me at very top level. You talk about the careers advice. We constantly come back to this as a movement of people when we're talking about this. And I loved it where you said industry just has to get involved and show people what is out there. And I think, again, we know time and time again, teachers don't know, why would they? And the young people aren't going to know, and parents aren't going to know. People don't know what they don't know, and that's so important. And I love the fact you brought in about the upskill piece and digital, and there's a much bandied around statistic which changes depending on your source, but you know, 30% of primary school children are going to be doing jobs that currently don't exist. I mean, how can anyone future-proof themselves in terms of skills going into the workplace? I mean, you just can't. We all have to upskill as we go through our careers. And I thought it was really interesting. We talked about people not liking the title apprentice, and I guess we're all the converted, aren't we? We all see it as such a positive, but of course you forget that how it can still be perceived as something less than. And for the club, that issue of parity of esteem, or that theme of parity of esteem, is really important. And I loved you talked about the loyalty of the apprentices and the return on investment. And again, that's something I think the club is looking at. We'd like to do a piece around the return on investment in an apprentice. And also, I'd actually loved it about the apprentices teaching the grads. Well, if ever we need an example of parity of esteem, I think that's a fantastic one. So thank you very much. That was great. That now brings us on to Daniel Bellis. Daniel is Senior Policy Manager at the Federation of Small Businesses. It's really important that we don't forget the SMEs in this. 60% of our movement are SMEs, and of course SMEs are the lifeblood of any supply chain. So Daniel's going to give us that SME perspective. Over to you, Daniel.
All right, thank you, Jill. And firstly, Susan, that was really good to hear some of the stories behind the business there. I think it's often too easy, and I'll apologise just now because I'm about to make the exact same mistake to talk about these things in terms of percentages and numbers. But I think what we really need to remember is that actually there is a human element to this, and there are those stories of of the young apprentice at the age of 16 joining and going off to a degree that actually are the reason why these percentages and figures matter going forward. Anyway, with that said, I'll get on with the rest of my talk. So I'm Dan Bellis, Senior Policy Manager for the Federation of Small Businesses. We are effectively a little bit like a trade union. We're one of the biggest representative bodies of small businesses. And that means that we try and represent small businesses on a range of different issues to both local and national governments across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We also do a bit of international work, which, as I'm sure you can all imagine, has been quite busy over the last couple of years. But with regards to social value and the public sector, there are really two main ways that SMEs can get involved in this and sort of demonstrate their social value in this context. The first is direct procurement. Now, this is where an SME may work directly with local government or central government on a large project, contracting at that direct point with a government department or with a local authority. Now, when small businesses get involved with this, there's often a lot of perceived barriers in their way, whether this is high insurance requirements, contracting opportunities that have been built up to such a high level, both in terms of the deliverabilities, the value of those contracts, that SMEs can't realistically bid for them in the first place, or whether it's something a little bit more fundamental in terms of the central authority maybe putting out an opportunity for a product rather than a solution to an issue that they necessarily have. However, despite this, for those looking to contract direct with local government or national government, there are a range of opportunities. A lot of the ones that we've discussed today have been around construction, and it's obvious to see why. It's one of the biggest public procurement expenditures at the moment, and from our conversations with SMEs in our membership, it's actually one of the most popular ones to be involved in, simply because the amount of good work that generally tends to happen in construction compared to other parts of the public procurement process. But generally, regardless of what you do as an SME, there is almost always an opportunity for you to get involved in public procurement at some stage. It's just a case of finding that opportunity. And whether or not that's via the local authority advertising, the central government use of contracts finder, or somewhere further in the supply chain, if you can find that opportunity, there are thousands out there for you to be able to get involved in, and hopefully demonstrate what you can do as an SME, not just in terms of delivering on the contract, but in terms of what you can add in terms of social value as well. And one of the big drivers behind this, especially for central government, is that there's a commitment there to spend every £1 in £3 spent in public procurement with SMEs by 2022. Now, that is both in terms of within the supply chain and directly with SMEs. So we're obviously holding government's feet to the fire on this to make sure that we do see an increased rate of SMEs in the supply chain, but also working with them to try and improve that figure, and working with government and the large contractors, the tier one suppliers, to try and help and encourage them to attract the best SMEs possible, and try and really extract the best out of SMEs going forward, because SMEs can often be a great source of inspiration, both in terms of delivering on social value, but also innovative ways of, quite frankly, doing work. There might be tried and tested solutions that have been around for 100 years, but you can bet that there's an SME somewhere who's thought of a slightly better way of doing it. And for large companies, that's really where added value begins to come in, is where you find these SMEs in your supply chain that just happen to have that little nugget of gold that makes the entire project a little bit easier, or a little bit better, or a little bit quicker. So if we can have the next slide, please. So this is where we come on to indirect procurement. So this is where an SME will be talking not directly to central government or local government, but actually somewhere in the supply chain, whether or not this is tier 2, 3, 4, further down. So this can often be less bureaucratic, it's more market-led. That's not to say that there aren't difficulties there, but obviously to some extent this always comes with the territory. But it can often mean that it's more of a market-driven solution. So in terms of central government putting out large contracting opportunities, for example, let's say somebody wants to build a railway from London to John O'Groats. I don't think there's many SMEs that can do that on themselves, so it requires somebody to come in and actually orchestrate that and pull all that together. But what that means, instead of one big contract coming along for a massive railway network, is that actually there's lots and lots and lots of opportunities. So I was talking to one of our members just the other day, actually, that's working on High Speed 2, who's, and I may get this wrong, so please step in if I do, but I think they're delivering the trees that High Speed 2 is planting along some of its routes, no pun intended there, to add in that element of social value and that environmental responsibility going forward. So just because you're building a high-speed rail network doesn't mean that actually if your business is sourcing different types of trees, and forgive me, I'm not an expert on trees, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a role for you there going forward. So there can be lots of these niche opportunities within the supply chain, and it can be an opportunity to really show off what your business can do. It also means that we move away from this trend of procuring for solutions, procuring for products rather than solutions. So if a tier 1 contractor has a particular problem, then they will often put out an advert reach to their SMEs in their supply chain and say, right, this is the problem, how can we fix it? Rather than necessarily what happens sometimes when you're contracting directly with government, where the government already has the problem, they already think they know the solution, and therefore they procure for a very specific product, and sometimes can necessarily miss out on what the SME is offering. And often what the SME is offering will not be the same product that government had in mind, but it also might be just a little bit different, just a little bit more social value in there that can really help deliver where those traditional ways of thinking maybe disagree with them slightly. So if we can have the next slide, please. So what do SMEs actually do when it comes to social value, when it comes to getting involved in these supply chains and these public reports? FSB actually wrote a communities report called Small Business, Big Heart. If you just write that into Google, it's normally one of the first things to come out. But this was published in 2019 and was our way of kind of doing that deep dive into SMEs to see actually what are they delivering? Because our thought was that a lot of SMEs actually deliver social value without knowing that they're delivering social value. It's considered, well, this is how we do business. This is quite simply what we do. We didn't realise that there was 10% to be won on contracting opportunities going forward for this type of work. So there's a few stats there which obviously highlights some of the great work that SME is doing. But there are others as well. So small businesses, 38% of them donate time to simply put into their community work, whether or not this is rebuilding community infrastructure projects such as local football clubs, new showers or whatever. 32% are contributing skills, 78% of small businesses have at least one worker of 50. And as I'm sure you can see there, 95% of small businesses take on at least one worker from a labour market disadvantaged group. There's many more stories in this. And again, the report itself does bring out the human element a little bit more than the data in this. But it's just really there to highlight that role that actually SMEs do a lot of social value, both in terms of apprenticeships that they're taking on, but also that wider market on those core themes mentioned earlier, that SMEs don't really see as social value. It's just considered part of their job. So our role as FSB and I suppose the tier 1 suppliers as well, looking to get SMEs within their supply chains and encourage them in, is to kind of encourage them to think a bit differently about what they're doing in terms of social values, that those things that they did on the side is generally just seen as a good thing to do, actually have a real value and can help them win work down the line. And it also helps those tier 1 contractors meet some of their social value requirements as well. Because often if you're an SME coming into a supply chain, the social value requirements around that contract, that big public sector contract, will already be fairly well defined. So if you're a tier 1 supplier, you can look towards those SMEs as a way of fulfilling that social value requirement going forward, because often that's really where the key differences are made. But it's important to be able to bring out that aspect of social value from SMEs, because if you ask them in terms of what do you do for social value, a lot of SMEs might not necessarily understand immediately what social value means. But if you say, do you work with the community? Are you employing apprentices? Are you employing people from disadvantaged groups? And the answer is resoundingly yes. So if we can have the next slide, please. So this then brings us on to the question of what next. We have SMEs pumping out social value left, right and centre, but not necessarily understanding what it is. We have a desire to get more SMEs into public sector supply chains, both directly and indirectly. But there's still a few hurdles that we have to overcome. And this is really our day job in terms of the FSB and or at least my day job anyway, in terms of what we're trying to do to try and encourage more SMEs to get involved in this sector and really allow their elements of social value and the value of apprenticeships to shine going forward. We've been working with industry and with central government on the sourcing playbook. And this is really the document that the civil service, local government, central government will be using to make those decisions on when to go out for procurement and how they're going to do procurement. So as I'm sure you can imagine, government's an untidy beast at best. And sometimes the old way of doing things stays the way of doing things for perhaps a little bit too long. So this playbook was developed with the FSB and industry and central government to try and really look at how the market does their procuring and how government can perhaps change to make it a little bit more dynamic, so that we can get away from procuring for products into procuring for solutions, and really allow businesses of all sizes and shapes to really demonstrate what they can do and bring a little bit of that innovation and that dynamic ways of working to central government practices. We've also been hosting a series of workshops with central government to try and explain to SMEs what social value is, how they can apply for these contracts, and how they can sort of demonstrate what their business offers. But we've also been doing a lot of work in supply chain generally. So recently we've worked with the Good Business Pays campaign to ensure that those small businesses in supply chains and doing B2B transactions get paid fairly and promptly, because we all know that actually being paid on time helps to support those apprentices and helps support the long-term future of those businesses going forward. So in conclusion, there's an awful lot of potential there for SMEs to get involved in supply chains at all sorts of levels. But it's really important that we make it as easy for them to try and bring out that aspect of social value and allow that dynamic way of working and that ingenuity to really come forward and hopefully bring in that added value to everybody's supply chains. Thank you.
Daniel, wow, thank you so much. There's a huge amount in there and an awful lot, and I'd like to come back to some of this in the Q&A. I think a lot in there for somebody if they're an SME, but also people about making sure their supply chains or having as many SMEs as possible in their supply chain. I love some of the things you brought up. Sorry, my headphones have dropped now. About the thousands of opportunities, and people may be in a niche area of business, but there are thousands of opportunities. I think you used the phrase "if you can find them," so perhaps we'll come back to that. And I love the tree example. I thought that was great. And I thought also the way you talked about this move away from procuring for product to procuring for solutions is a really important message we've got to land as well. So thank you so much. A very rich presentation. To our attendees, please do post questions in chat or Q&A. We've got a couple lined up, but want to make sure there's a lot that's been covered so far. Want to make sure we can get to the detail so that people can get a greater understanding. Before we move on to Q&A, I know we're back to Sam, who is just going to talk about how perhaps the club can help, and we'd love ideas that people might want to suggest as well, but areas that perhaps we can help on going forward on this. Sam, back to you.
Thank you. So I think the power of this community is how we can share best practice and information between us. So I think there's probably two key areas where, you know, we as a community of like-minded apprenticeship supporters can work together. And I think the first is to share those fantastic links that I know have been in the chat that we've talked about, you know, from Daniel and from others, is share that best practice, share the information that's coming out of government. So there's a one-stop shop. So if you need that information, perhaps some of this may be new to you, it's all in one place. And I think Jill will be able to find a place to put all that so it's easy to find. I think the second part is how we communicate and collaborate as a community together. Is while this has been in place for a while for local government, it is still new for central government, and so there's going to be a ramping up of activity, of you know, seeing how it goes. And I think working together to share our experiences, share case studies and best practice, and promote the power of apprenticeships. Again, I think it's going to be really powerful. And Jill runs such incredible events on a regular basis, so hopefully there will be opportunities for you to connect, engage, learn and work together over the course of the next sort of year or so as this comes into full force. I think will be really useful. But as Jill said, this is a by member for organisation. If you've got ideas of what you need and what would be helpful for you, please do put them in the chat so that Jill can take them on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Yes, absolutely. And definitely happy to do something further on social value if people have a need. Now, I'll move on to Q&A. So if we could have all our fantastic speakers back again and ready. I'll take these in the order we received them. So Andy Hamilton of the R&W group, thank you, Andy. Andy said, when you say 10% of the marking score, do you mean the quality score or the whole score?
It's the whole score. And this is why this is such a key topic that we need to be talking about. So it's not 10% of a subpart, it's 10% of the total score.
Right.
And it's a minimum 10%. So we've seen up to 20% in some bids.
Great, thank you for that, Sam. I think that probably answers that question, so I don't know if we need to do that any further. Kate, there's a question here for you, Noel Taylor of the Horbury Group, and we know Noel well. Kate, you mentioned carrot and stick, but Noel was saying his experience is that there is too little carrot. Costs of social value delivery seem to fall on subcontractors who've already had to cut their costs to win bids. What carrots have HS2 used, and do subcontractors benefit from fulfilling social value elements of contracts? Any ideas to improve on this? It's quite a lot in there. So Kate, do you need me to run through that again? Or
I think I've got it, and I think part of the difficulty for us in the centre is how much is going through the tier 1 contractor. So I'd be very happy to pick up with Noel separately as well. We do have fora and groups, but because our contractual relationship is directly with the tier 1, we tend to hear it from their lens rather than necessarily those who are subcontracting with them. So I think it's a really interesting observation, and I want to take it away. Some of the things that we are doing is we are increasingly looking to work with our tier 2s where we can. So for example, we've recently launched a job brokerage portal, so vacancies for all our tier 1 contractors are available on the HS2 website. We're looking to work with some tier 2s, so their vacancies are there, so they get to benefit from that as well, if you see what I mean. But I think it's a genuine challenge that we need to do more, but the team is really small, so open to thinking about how we can do that going beyond the tier 1s, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. Because I think there's certainly more carrots for those than there are for their subcontractors.
Okay. I don't know if any of our other speakers want to comment on that question as well. Susan, I don't know if you want to come in. Don't feel you have to if you don't want to, but if you had anything else to add on that.
Yeah, I think I think once you can dig into it, for me, it's not about spending more money. It's about thinking differently about what you do spend. And that does sound a little bit trite, and isn't that, nice and easy to do? But on the enabling works contract, yes, they had the carrot of having a skills and employment team. But in terms of what they actually spent additionally on social value, it was limited to some money to the social value portal to define the return into the community, and a little bit of money for the Prince's Trust, which actually, after a little while, we stopped paying that money because we were getting better benefits from working with local community groups, SMEs and local charities who didn't have that cost associated with it. So I think once you dig into it, I don't think social value for me is about spending more money. It's about spending what you're spending, but thinking differently about how you spend it. And a little bit of that is the accessibility that Daniel spoke about. It's about removing the barriers so you can bring in, SMEs and local procurement, and not making that unattainable or too daunting or too scary.
Thank you. And Daniel, I don't know if you wanted to come in on something there.
Yeah, this is sadly a bit of a practice that we've seen across a range of sort of government contracts. The big one that we worked on with regards to this in the sourcing playbook was the one around unlimited liability. So there are things like contracts that were worth £10 million, and there was a subcontractor in tier 3, and that complete unlimited liability of about £10 million being passed straight the way down the supply chain to a small business that was only worth about £1 million at most. So there was no way they could take on that liability, no way they were going to get insurance, that sort of thing, because it's simply just been passed down the supply chain from one to the next without it being split up. Now, a lot of the time that was actually a requirement of central government's contracting systems, and we had to work hard to get that out of the way to allow it to be to allow that proportion of risk to be shared across the supply chain a little bit more easily. But what often happens with those sort of things is that the policy people like myself say, this should be a great idea, and then the contract goes to the lawyers, and their job is to not get sued. So the easiest thing for them to do is pass everything down. But with regards to social value, we kind of want to see a similar thing happen in terms of, let's be sensible about where this is all going to be delivered. If you are a tier 1 contractor, you are not going to deliver 100% of your social value through one SME. You have to do it across the board. You have to be a little bit more realistic about where all this is coming from, and look at yourselves as well as your SMEs and think, actually, we're in this together. This is a partnership. This is not necessarily a transactional relationship. And I think to some extent, across all of UK PLC, we have to get out of that mindset of this is a purely commercial transactional relationship. I pay you this, you give me X. No, you're there to deliver a project. There is a relationship there, but there's a project to deliver and there are wider goals behind it. So the quicker we start thinking about this as being a partnership, working together on these projects instead of supply chain, I'm here, you're there, hopefully we begin to resolve a couple of these situations further down the line.
Great, thanks for that, Daniel. And I think this next one would be for you as well. And it struck me when you were talking about the thousands of opportunities. And as I say, I think you used a phrase, I'm looking at my notes, if you can find them. Olivia asks, where would someone go to look for these government and supply chain contracts? So
you'll hate me for this, but the answer is it depends. If you're looking for central government contracts, you should be looking at Contracts Finder, which is your first point of call. Now, if you pop that into Google, there are a few advertised ones. It's the free one. It's run by central government. It is an unruly beast of a website that can be quite difficult to navigate, but as soon as you get used to it, it is relatively straightforward. And all central government contracting opportunities should be advertised on there. Sometimes they differ a little bit. I know High Speed 2 uses a slightly different portal. And local governments tend to use their own portals as well. So if you've got an idea of the local government that you're around that you would potentially like to be supplying to, they all normally have their own procurement websites. We are strongly encouraging government and all supply chains to just put all their contracting opportunities in one place. And importantly, make sure that they're freely accessible. So you should not have to pay at all to be able to access contracting opportunities going forward. They should be free to anybody to look at and anybody to apply to, provided obviously they're an actual business and not, for example, myself trying to plant 1,000 trees on the route of High Speed 2.
Great, and perhaps we can circulate the link to that actually after this event if that people would find that useful. I don't seem to have any more questions, but so if you're an attendee on this and you've got a burning question, Kate's just posted hers, where opportunities can be found for HS2, so thank you, Kate. I suppose then perhaps I'd just like to go to our panelists for some kind of final sort of pointers, really, if our panelists are happy to do so. And Sam, perhaps I could pull you back into just some kind of very top level advice for people on this event, some of whom are from large companies, some from SMEs. What would your overriding kind of summary point be for everyone?
I think we need to recognise this is quite a profound shift in how central government is buying, and I think we need to look at this as a positive opportunity for a win-win-win for government, for us as businesses, and for the society that we work in. I think it requires some careful thinking. So if this is a tick box, we just miss opportunities. I also think it's multidisciplinary. So many of the audience today will be from an early careers function or an HR function. And you may find that within your business, the approach to social value will be led by your business development team. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to collaborate across our businesses. And then I think that final piece is building strong, sustainable, great quality relationships with your supply chain is always beneficial. And I think treating this as a partnership approach where people are collaborating, us as a community, but also within our supply chains to create that win-win and the innovation and the exciting things. I think those would be my top suggestions, tips and recommendations.
Thanks, Sam. And Susan, I know that was a particular passionate point of yours as well, that this isn't just about one part of the business. This is multidisciplinary. I don't know if you want to expand any further on that or make any other points.
Yeah, I think we all need to be part of the journey. We can't sit back and expect HR and learning and development to attract all the apprentices that we're looking for, because they're not the people who can articulate what we do and how amazing it is and what a wonderful industry it is to work in. So we have to be part of the journey. And at the moment, we are not, as an industry, I don't think, attractive enough either to young people or indeed to their parents. We're not showing our best side. And I think the other point I really liked, which I was reflecting on, was Daniel's point about SMEs and their ideas. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think some of the best points in how we're delivering come from our SMEs rocking up and going, why are you doing that? And it's great. And that reverse mentoring sort of, there's as many benefits to tier ones that we get from the SMEs as we give to the SMEs. And we really need to do all we can to remove the barriers and make this less daunting and share how we are delivering social value, because there is no downside for me.
Right. Thank you, Susan. And Kate, if I could invite you, if you want to make any final comment or anything else you'd like to say about the whole social value piece.
Yeah, I think, as I said, from HS2's perspective, it is something that we're passionate about. I think we maybe don't call it social value in that same way, but it's the recognising that this isn't CSR round the edges, which is sometimes seen, and the comments from other colleagues about this isn't just an HR or a learning and development problem. For us to build this railway on time and on budget, we need to make sure we've got people with the skills to deliver that. That means we need to have these interventions. There's no silver bullet. We need to have regional interventions, specific skills interventions, etc., all which kind of comes under social value, because otherwise we're not going to be able to deliver on time and on budget. So it's that kind of criticality of these issues around skills and around social value to delivery, and we really need that seat at the top table.
Great, thank you. And Daniel, any last thoughts for SMEs or even the larger organisations on this call? Anything else you'd like to add?
It really, there's sort of two final points, one for SMEs and one for sort of large organisations. I think for SMEs, it's don't be afraid of public procurement, whether it's direct or indirect. Yes, there are issues there, and believe me, we're working hard to try and remove as many of those as we can, but the opportunities are there. And if you've the willingness and the desire to go through with it, then we've seen SMEs go through leaps and bounds, not just in terms of winning work, but also developing their products, developing their businesses, upscaling. It can be a real catalyst for SMEs to get involved in there, and it's definitely something worth exploring. And for those larger businesses that are working with SMEs in their supply chains, SMEs have huge amounts to deliver, massive amounts of potential, but we need to stop thinking about this in terms of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and only talking between individual tiers. Start thinking about it as actually we're all in here to deliver this project. Let's look at the solutions in a very broad brush approach to this, and really take forward that mentality of a team working together to finish a project or to service a contract, as opposed to I'm tier X, you're tier this, and therefore there's this split between us. We really need to start being more collaborative with the way that we're working across all government contracts, quite frankly.
Great, thank you, Daniel. I think at this point then it's 10 minutes early, but that's always good to claw back 10 minutes in our working day. It just leaves me to say a huge thank you to our outstanding speakers. I think this has been a very content-rich event. And thank you to all our attendees for supporting us today. As I say, this event is going to be made available afterwards. So if anyone's missed any bits of it, you can catch up on it. I think a few 5% club things, if I may say a few things. Thank you to our patron supporters, without whom we would not be in existence. So thank you to them. And just to say, yes, as I say, the event's going to be on our website. Some 5% Club other news. We've got some future events. I've just sent you the link there in the chat. A couple of dates for your diary. 23rd of June, we have our masterclass on intersectionality. And on the 4th of November, we are planning to do a physical event. So fingers crossed, and put that in your diary. And if anyone's thinking of attending the apprenticeship conference in July, we've got a 15% discount for members, and that's on our website as well. And just to say, in terms of that 4th of November event, it's going to be linked to a really new, exciting membership initiative, something called the Employer Audit, which is going to be around supporting and validating our members as they work towards their commitment that at least 5% of their workforce are going to be an earn and learn. So we're going to be in touch with you very soon about that. So it just leaves me to say a big thank you again to our speakers and to everyone who supported us today. And do get in touch with me if you want any further information about the club. Bye-bye.